Deaf boy tries to communicate with supermarket cashier and is humiliated until George Strait joins the conversation and moves everyone to tears. In the scorching heat of a Texas afternoon, 12-year-old Nathan Rodriguez sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, counting the same pile of coins for the 10th time that day. His fingers moved with careful precision as he separated quarters from dimes, nickels from pennies, creating neat little towers on the worn carpet. $23.47. It had taken him 8 months of saving every penny, from odd jobs around the neighborhood to collect this small fortune, and tomorrow would finally be the day he had been dreaming about for so long. Tomorrow was his mother's 34th birthday, and Nathan had a plan that would change everything. For years, he had watched Melissa work herself to exhaustion, juggling 2 jobs just to keep food on their table and a roof over their heads. She would leave before dawn to clean offices downtown, return home just long enough to make him lunch, then rush off to her evening shift at the local diner. Nathan had never heard his mother complain, not once, but he had seen the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged when she thought he wasn't looking. What made Nathan's situation unique wasn't just his determination to surprise his mother, but the fact that he had been born profoundly deaf. In the world that often moved too fast for patience and understanding, Nathan had learned to navigate life through visual cues, written notes, and the beautiful dance of sign language that his mother had learned alongside him. Melissa had spent countless hours practicing, watching YouTube videos late into the night, determined to communicate with her son in his own language. The small town of Cedar Creek, Texas, wasn't exactly known for its diversity or inclusion. With a population of just over 3,000 people, everyone knew everyone else's business, and Nathan had grown accustomed to being the deaf kid wherever he went. Some people spoke louder when they saw him, as if volume could somehow penetrate his silent world. Others avoided eye contact altogether, uncomfortable with what they didn't understand. But Nathan had learned to find joy in the small things. The way sunlight danced through his bedroom window, the vibrations he could feel when his mother played George Strait's music loud enough, and the proud smile on Melissa's face whenever he accomplished something new. Speaking of George Strait, Nathan and his mother shared an unusual bond over the country music legend. While Nathan couldn't hear the melodies that made millions of fans swoon, he could feel the bass lines through the floorboards of their small apartment, and he had memorized every word of George's songs by reading the lyrics. His mother would sign the stories behind the songs, translating the emotions and narratives into a language Nathan could understand. They had a collection of George Strait albums that Melissa had found at garage sales, and she would describe the instrumentation, the way George's voice rose and fell, painting musical pictures that Nathan treasured. Now, as Nathan carefully placed his savings back into the old coffee tin that served as his bank, he could hardly contain his excitement. His plan was simple but meaningful. He would walk to Murphy's grocery store, just 4 blocks from their apartment, and buy his mother the most beautiful small chocolate cake he could afford, along with a box of her favorite chocolates. It would be his first time shopping completely alone, without his mother by his side to help communicate with store employees. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. Nathan had been preparing for this moment for weeks. He had written out a note explaining his deafness and his intention to purchase specific items. He had practiced pointing to items and using basic gestures that most people could understand. He had even walked past Murphy's grocery several times, timing how long it took to get there, observing the layout through the large front windows, mentally rehearsing every step of his mission. But what Nathan didn't know was that fate had something extraordinary planned for that ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Just 3 blocks away, in the parking lot of the Comfort Inn, a tour bus sat quietly in the shade of ancient oak trees. Inside that bus, George Strait himself was reviewing the set list for his benefit concert scheduled for that evening at the Cedar Creek Community Center. The concert was part of a small-town tour George had organized to raise funds for children's charities across rural Texas, and Cedar Creek was his final stop. George had arrived earlier that morning, preferring to spend the day quietly in small towns rather than rushing from city to city. At 59 years old, he had learned to appreciate these moments of calm before the storm of performance. He enjoyed walking through small communities, grabbing a bite at local diners, maybe picking up a few items at neighborhood stores. It grounded him, reminded him of his own humble beginnings, and often provided inspiration for future songs. As Nathan finished his coin-counting ritual, he carefully placed the coffee tin in his backpack, along with his prepared note and a small wallet that contained his precious savings. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror above his dresser, straightening his favorite blue t-shirt and running his fingers through his dark hair. This was it. This was his moment to prove to himself and to his mother that he could be independent, that his deafness wouldn't stop him from accomplishing his goals. 3 floors below, Melissa was just finishing her morning shift supervisor call with the cleaning company, discussing schedules and supply orders. She sat in their old Honda Civic, windows down to catch any available breeze, completely unaware that her son was about to embark on an adventure that would change both of their lives forever. She had agreed to let Nathan make this trip alone. After weeks of his persistent requests, recognizing that at 12 years old, he needed opportunities to build confidence and independence. Nathan bounded down the stairs, his backpack secured tightly across his shoulders. Through the car window, he signed to his mother that he was ready to go, his hands moving with the fluid grace that came from years of practice. Melissa signed back, reminding him to be careful, to take his time, and to find her immediately if he encountered any problems. She would wait in the car, giving him the space he needed while staying close enough to help if necessary. As they drove toward Murphy's grocery, neither Nathan nor Melissa could have imagined that this simple shopping trip would become a story that would spread across the internet, touch millions of hearts, and ultimately transform their modest life in ways they had never dared to dream. The stage was set for an encounter that would prove, once and for all, that kindness and understanding could triumph over ignorance and prejudice. Nathan stepped out of the car, his hand gripping the strap of his backpack like a lifeline. The automatic doors of Murphy's grocery whooshed open, welcoming him into a world where he would soon discover that heroes come in the most unexpected forms, and that sometimes the most profound conversations happen without a single word being spoken. The cool air conditioning of Murphy's grocery hit Nathan's face like a gentle embrace as he crossed the threshold into unfamiliar territory. The store was busier than he had anticipated, with the usual Tuesday afternoon crowd of mothers with crying babies, elderly folks taking their time in every aisle, and teenagers grabbing snacks after school. Nathan felt his heart racing as he navigated through the entrance, his eyes quickly scanning the layout to orient himself. He had studied this store from outside, but being inside was completely different. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a bright clinical glow. Shopping carts rattled past him, their wheels creating vibrations he could feel through the linoleum floor. Nathan pulled out his phone and checked the time. 2:15 in the afternoon. His mother's shift at the diner didn't start until 5, so he had plenty of time to complete his mission without rushing. Nathan made his way toward the bakery section, weaving between displays of seasonal decorations and back-to-school supplies. His eyes lit up when he spotted the cake display case, filled with beautiful confections that looked like they belonged in a fancy restaurant rather than a small-town grocery store. There were elaborate birthday cakes decorated with roses, simple sheet cakes with cheerful messages, and individual portions perfect for small celebrations. After careful consideration, Nathan selected a small round chocolate cake decorated with delicate white frosting flowers. It was exactly what his mother would love, simple, elegant, and not too expensive. The price tag read $12.99, well within his budget. He carefully lifted the plastic container and cradled it in his arms as if it were made of precious crystal. Next, he ventured toward the candy aisle, searching for his mother's favorite chocolates. Melissa had a weakness for dark chocolate truffles, something she rarely allowed herself to buy, given their tight budget. Nathan had noticed her lingering over the chocolate display during their previous shopping trips together, her fingers tracing the boxes before reluctantly moving on to more practical purchases. He found a small but elegant box of assorted dark chocolates for $8.47. Combined with the cake, his purchase would total $21.46, leaving him with exactly $2.01 in change. The math worked out perfectly, and Nathan felt a surge of pride at his careful planning and budgeting. As he made his way toward the front of the store, Nathan's confidence began to waver. The checkout lines were longer than he had expected, and he could see that some cashiers appeared stressed and impatient with the afternoon rush. He chose what seemed like the shortest line, standing behind a woman with two young children who were begging for candy from the strategically placed displays near the register. Nathan used this waiting time to review his plan one more time. He touched the note in his pocket, feeling the crisp edges of the paper he had folded and refolded dozens of times while practicing at home. The note was clear and concise, explaining his deafness and requesting patience during the transaction. He had even included a smiley face at the bottom, hoping it would encourage friendliness from whoever helped him. 3 people ahead of him in line, Nathan noticed a man wearing a worn cowboy hat and dark sunglasses, casually dressed in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. The man seemed patient and relaxed, occasionally glancing around the store with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. There was something familiar about him, but Nathan couldn't quite place it. The man's presence was somehow reassuring in the midst of Nathan's growing nervousness. The line moved slowly. The woman in front of Nathan was having issues with her payment card, requiring the cashier to call for assistance. Nathan watched as the cashier, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a perpetually annoyed expression, grew increasingly frustrated with each delay. His name tag read Frank, and even from a distance, Nathan could sense the man's impatience radiating like heat from a summer sidewalk. Finally, it was Nathan's turn. He approached the counter with his cake and chocolates, his heart hammering so hard he was sure everyone in the store could feel the vibrations. Frank looked up from his register with barely concealed irritation, his eyes immediately focusing on Nathan's youth rather than his purchases. "You got money for this stuff, kid?" Frank asked brusquely, already reaching for the items to scan them. Nathan nodded enthusiastically and reached into his pocket to retrieve his carefully prepared note. He unfolded it and placed it on the counter, in front of Frank, pointing to the text and then to himself to indicate that the message was important. Frank glanced at the note without really reading it, his attention divided between Nathan and the growing line behind him. "What's this supposed to be? I don't have time to read your homework, kid. Just tell me what you want and pay for your stuff." Nathan's smile faltered as he realized Frank hadn't understood. He pointed more insistently at the note, then at his ears, trying to communicate his condition through gestures. His hands moved tentatively in basic sign language, forming the signs for deaf and please read. "Oh, great," Frank muttered loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "We got ourselves a special case here. Look, kid, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I've got a line of paying customers waiting. Either you talk or you get out of line." Nathan felt heat rushing to his cheeks as he became aware that other customers were now staring at him. Some seemed curious, others annoyed by the delay. A few had their phones out, though whether to check the time or for other reasons Nathan couldn't tell. He tried again to point to his note, his movements becoming more desperate and frantic. Frank snatched the note from the counter and gave it a cursory glance before crumpling it up and tossing it toward a nearby trash can. "I don't have time for this nonsense. You kids think you can come in here and waste my time with your pranks. Move along before I call the manager." The crumpled note missed the trash can and landed on the floor near Nathan's feet. He stared at it in disbelief, his carefully crafted explanation lying discarded like worthless garbage. Tears began to well up in his eyes as the full impact of the situation hit him. He was trapped in a nightmare where his voice, the one tool he needed most, simply didn't exist. Nathan bent down to retrieve his note, smoothing it out with trembling fingers. As he stood back up, he noticed that the man in the cowboy hat had moved closer, now just 2 people behind him in line. The man's expression had changed from casual interest to focused concern, his eyes intently watching the interaction between Nathan and Frank. "What's wrong with you, boy?" Frank continued, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "You deaf or something? Can't you see you're holding up my line?" The cruel irony of Frank's words wasn't lost on Nathan, even in his distressed state. Yes, he was deaf, and no, he couldn't see how that was anyone's business but his own. He tried once more to place the note on the counter, his hands shaking so badly that he nearly dropped his precious cake. Frank pushed the note back toward Nathan without looking at it. "I told you, I don't have time for games. Either you speak up and buy your stuff, or you get out of my line. I've got real customers waiting." Behind Frank, other employees continued their work, either unaware of the situation or choosing to ignore it. The store manager was nowhere to be seen, and Nathan felt completely alone despite being surrounded by dozens of people. He looked desperately toward the front windows, hoping to catch his mother's attention, but the angle was wrong, and she couldn't see into the store from where she was parked. Nathan's shoulders began to shake as he fought back tears of frustration and humiliation. This was supposed to be his moment of independence, his chance to prove that he could accomplish something meaningful on his own. Instead, he was being treated like an inconvenience, a problem to be solved or removed. "You know what?" Frank said, his patience finally exhausted. "I'm calling security. We don't need troublemakers in here disrupting business." The word troublemaker hit Nathan like a physical blow. He had never caused trouble in his life. He was a straight-A student who helped elderly neighbors with their groceries and spent his free time reading books from the library. All he wanted was to buy his mother a birthday cake and chocolates with money he had earned and saved through months of hard work. As Frank reached for the phone to call security, Nathan made one last desperate attempt to communicate. He pointed to his ears, shook his head, and then pointed to the cake and chocolates, trying to convey through pure determination what his voice could not express. His movements were becoming more frantic, more desperate, as the weight of impending failure pressed down on him. "Stop waving your hands around like that," Frank snapped. "You're making a scene. People are starting to stare." Nathan looked around and realized Frank was right. The entire front of the store had grown quiet, with customers and employees alike watching the drama unfold. Some faces showed sympathy, others annoyance, but no one stepped forward to help. Nathan felt exposed and vulnerable, like a specimen under a microscope, and he wanted nothing more than to disappear entirely. It was at that moment, when Nathan's hope was at its lowest point and his humiliation seemed complete, that he heard a deep, familiar voice behind him say, "Excuse me, son, I think there might be a better way to handle this situation." Nathan turned around to see the man in the cowboy hat stepping forward, and something in his kind eyes and gentle demeanor made Nathan's heart skip a beat with the faintest glimmer of hope. Section 3. The man in the cowboy hat moved with quiet confidence as he approached the checkout counter, his presence immediately commanding attention without demanding it. Frank looked up from his register, clearly annoyed at yet another interruption to what he considered his efficient customer processing system. "Sir, this kid is holding up the line with some kind of prank," Frank began, his voice taking on a slightly more respectful tone as he noticed the man's age and bearing. "I've asked him multiple times to speak up or move along, but he just keeps waving his hands around and trying to give me notes." The stranger's eyes moved from Frank to Nathan, taking in the boy's tear-stained cheeks, trembling hands, and the crumpled note he still clutched desperately. There was something in the man's expression that made Nathan feel seen, truly seen, for the first time since entering the store. "May I?" the man asked gently, extending his hand toward Nathan's note. Nathan hesitated for a moment, then carefully handed over his precious explanation. The man unfolded it with the same care Nathan had used to write it, smoothing out the wrinkles Frank had created. As he read, his expression grew more serious, and when he looked back up at Nathan, there was something new in his eyes. Not pity, but understanding and respect. What happened next would be talked about in Cedar Creek for years to come. The man in the cowboy hat raised his hands and began to sign, his movements fluid and natural, as if he had been using sign language his entire life. "Hello, Nathan," he signed, including the boy's name finger-spelled after reading it from the note. "My name is George. I see you're trying to buy something special for your mother's birthday." Nathan's eyes widened in complete shock. Not only was this stranger communicating with him in his own language, but there was something incredibly familiar about him. As recognition dawned, Nathan's mouth fell open in disbelief. Standing before him, dressed casually and without fanfare, was George Strait, the king of country music himself, the man whose songs had provided the soundtrack to countless evenings with his mother. You're... Nathan started to sign, his hands moving frantically as excitement and disbelief warred within him. "Yes, I am," George signed back with a warm smile. "But right now, I'm just someone who wants to help you finish your shopping. Tell me about these gifts you've chosen for your mother." The entire front of the store had gone silent. Customers who had been impatiently checking their watches now stood transfixed, pulling out phones to capture this extraordinary moment. Frank, meanwhile, had gone pale as he realized exactly who was standing in his checkout line, and more importantly, who had witnessed his treatment of Nathan. Nathan's hands moved with growing confidence as he explained his months of saving, his careful selection of the chocolate cake and truffles, and his plan to surprise his mother on her birthday. George listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions, treating Nathan's story with the same attention he might give to a fellow performer discussing their craft. "Your mother is very lucky to have such a thoughtful son," George signed. "These are beautiful choices. How much money did you save for this shopping trip?" When Nathan explained his budget and showed George his carefully counted coins and bills, the country star's respect for the boy's dedication was evident in his expression. Here was a child who had planned and saved for months to do something kind for his mother, only to be met with cruelty and misunderstanding. George turned to Frank, who was now sweating despite the store's air conditioning. "This young man," George said aloud, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, "has been trying to purchase gifts for his mother with money he saved over 8 months. He's deaf, which is why he was trying to give you that note explaining his situation." I didn't know," Frank stammered, suddenly very interested in avoiding eye contact with both George and Nathan. "The note explained everything," George continued, his tone remaining calm but firm. "Nathan wasn't causing trouble or playing pranks. He was simply trying to communicate in the only way available to him. In my experience, the best way to handle misunderstandings is with patience and kindness, not assumption and dismissal." By now, other employees had noticed the commotion and begun to gather. The store manager, a woman in her 50s named Carol. Martinez pushed through the small crowd that had formed around the checkout area. Her face showed concern and confusion until someone whispered George's identity in her ear, at which point her expression shifted to one of professional alarm mixed with starstruck amazement. "Mr. Strait," Carol said, approaching cautiously. "I'm so sorry if there's been any inconvenience. How can we help resolve this situation?" George gestured toward Nathan, who was watching the exchange with fascination. "This young man would like to complete his purchase. I believe that's all anyone wants here, for Nathan to be treated with the same respect and courtesy you'd show any customer." "Of course, absolutely," Carol said, shooting a meaningful look at Frank. "Frank, please process Nathan's items immediately." But George wasn't finished. He turned back to Nathan and signed, "Would you like me to help you with the transaction, or would you prefer to handle it yourself?" Nathan considered for a moment, then signed back, "I want to do it myself, but could you stay here in case I need help?" "I'll be right here," George assured him. Nathan stepped back up to the counter, his posture straighter and more confident. Now that he had an advocate by his side, he placed the cake and chocolates on the counter and pulled out his money, counting it carefully as Frank rang up the items with uncharacteristic care and attention. $21.46, Frank said quietly, his earlier aggression completely gone. Nathan handed over his bills and coins, receiving his change with a sense of accomplishment that had seemed impossible just minutes earlier. As Frank bagged his purchases, Nathan felt a tap on his shoulder. George was signing again. "You handled that perfectly," George told him. "Your mother is going to be so proud of you." Nathan beamed with pride, but then his expression grew curious. "How do you know sign language?" he asked. George's smile took on a more personal quality. "My younger brother was born deaf," he signed. "Learning to communicate with him was one of the most important things I ever did. It opened up a whole new world for our family." This revelation added another layer of meaning to the encounter. George's intervention hadn't been just about celebrity kindness or public relations. It had been personal, rooted in his own family experience with deafness and the importance of inclusion and understanding. "Nathan," George continued, "I'm performing at the community center tonight. It's a benefit concert for children's charities. Would you and your mother like to be my guests?" Nathan's hands froze mid-sign as the magnitude of the invitation hit him. A private invitation to see George Strait perform. It was beyond his wildest dreams. He nodded enthusiastically, his face lighting up with joy that was infectious to everyone watching. "Wonderful," George signed. "I'll make sure you have the best seats in the house." As Nathan gathered his purchases and prepared to leave, George turned to address the crowd that had gathered. "Folks, what we witnessed here today wasn't about celebrities or special treatment. It was about basic human decency and the importance of taking time to understand each other. Nathan taught me something today about courage and determination, and I hope his story reminds all of us to be more patient and kind in our daily interactions." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause, with many people wiping away tears. Someone shouted, "We love you, George," and others began chanting Nathan's name. The boy looked around in amazement, overwhelmed by the support and kindness that had emerged from what had started as his worst nightmare. Frank, who had been silent during George's speech, stepped forward hesitantly. "Nathan," he said, looking directly at the boy, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I'm sorry." Nathan looked at Frank for a long moment, then nodded graciously, showing a maturity beyond his 12 years. He signed something to George, who translated, "Nathan says he forgives you and hopes you'll learn to be more patient with other customers who might need extra help." "I will," Frank promised, and the sincerity in his voice suggested he meant it. As Nathan headed toward the exit, his purchases secure in their bag and his heart full of joy, he turned back to sign one more message to George. Thank you for seeing me." George's response was immediate and heartfelt. "Thank you for reminding me what true strength looks like." Nathan pushed through the store's automatic doors, stepping back into the Texas sunshine with his head held high and his mission accomplished. But as he walked toward his mother's car, he had no idea that the evening ahead would bring even more surprises, and that his simple act of wanting to buy birthday gifts would spark a movement that would change not just his own life, but the lives of deaf children throughout Texas and beyond. Section 4. Melissa Rodriguez looked up from her phone as she saw her son approaching the car and immediately knew something extraordinary had happened. Nathan's entire demeanor had changed from the nervous boy who had entered the store 30 minutes earlier. His shoulders were straight, his head held high, and there was a glow of excitement and pride radiating from his face that she hadn't seen in months. "How did it go, mijo?" she signed as Nathan climbed into the passenger seat, carefully placing his shopping bag between his feet like precious cargo. Nathan's hands moved with animated enthusiasm as he began to recount his adventure. "Mom, you're never going to believe what just happened. George Strait was in the store." Melissa's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "George Strait? Like our George Strait? The singer we listen to every night?" "Yes, and Mom, he knows sign language. He helped me when the cashier was being mean, and he invited us to his concert tonight." The story poured out of Nathan in a rush of excited gestures, his hands moving so quickly that Melissa had to ask him to slow down several times. As Nathan described Frank's cruel treatment, Melissa's expression grew dark with maternal fury. Her protective instincts flared as she imagined her sweet, innocent son being humiliated and dismissed by someone who should have shown basic human kindness. "That man had no right to treat you that way," she signed, her movements sharp with anger. "I should go back in there and give him a piece of my mind." "No, Mom, it's okay," Nathan assured her. "George made everything better. He talked to everyone about being kind and patient, and Frank apologized, really apologized, not just because he had to." As Nathan continued his story, describing George's personal revelation about his deaf brother and the invitation to the concert, Melissa felt tears welling up in her eyes. For years, she had worried about sending Nathan into the world alone, knowing that not everyone would have the patience or understanding to communicate with him. To hear that someone she admired had stepped up to defend her son filled her heart with gratitude and renewed faith in humanity. "Show me what he bought you," she signed, gesturing toward the shopping bag. Nathan carefully removed the chocolate cake and box of truffles, presenting them to his mother with the same pride he might show a hard-won trophy. "Happy early birthday, Mom. I saved for 8 months to buy these for you." Melissa stared at the gifts, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness and sacrifice they represented. She knew how hard Nathan worked for every penny, helping neighbors with yard work, organizing garage sales, and saving every coin he found. The fact that he had spent months planning this surprise, only to face such cruelty when trying to execute, it made her both proud and heartbroken. "Nathan, these are beautiful," she signed, her hands trembling slightly with emotion. "But you being safe and happy is the only gift I ever need." "I know, Mom, but I wanted to do something special. And now, because of what happened, we get to see George Strait perform. It's like the universe was watching out for us." Melissa pulled Nathan into a tight hug, holding him close as she processed everything he had told her. Her son had faced adversity with grace, accepted help with humility, and emerged stronger than before. These were the moments that reminded her why she worked so hard and sacrificed so much, not just to provide for Nathan's physical needs, but to raise him into the kind of person who could find light in darkness and kindness in conflict. "What should I wear to a George Strait concert?" Nathan asked, pulling back from the hug with renewed excitement. Melissa laughed, the sound mixing joy with relief. I think your best jeans and that blue button-down shirt your grandmother gave you last Christmas would be perfect." As they drove home to their small apartment, Nathan chattered excitedly about the evening ahead. He had never been to a live concert before, and the idea of seeing his musical hero perform in person seemed almost too good to be true. Melissa found herself caught between excitement and anxiety. While she was thrilled about the concert, she couldn't help but worry about whether they would fit in among George's usual audience. Their apartment was on the third floor of an older building that had seen better days, but Melissa had worked hard to make it feel like home. The walls were decorated with Nathan's artwork and school achievements, and every surface showed evidence of their shared love for music and learning. George Strait album covers served as artwork in the living room, and Melissa had framed the lyrics to their favorite songs alongside family photos. Nathan immediately headed to his room to begin preparing for the concert, treating it with the seriousness of a formal occasion. He laid out his clothes with military precision, then spent 20 minutes in front of the mirror practicing different ways to style his hair. The transformation from the nervous boy who had left for the store to the confident young man getting ready for his first concert was remarkable. Meanwhile, Melissa stood in her own closet, staring at her limited wardrobe with growing anxiety. She had exactly 3 outfits that weren't work uniforms. One dress for church, one for job interviews, and a casual outfit for grocery shopping. None of them seemed appropriate for attending a concert as the personal guest of a country music legend. Nathan appeared in her doorway, sensing his mother's distress with the intuition that comes from years of close communication. "What's wrong, Mom?" "I don't know what to wear," she admitted. "I've never been to a concert before, especially not as someone's special guest. What if I embarrass you?" Nathan walked over and took his mother's hands in his, looking directly into her eyes. "Mom, you could never embarrass me. You're the strongest, kindest person I know. George Strait invited us because of who we are, not because of what we wear." His words carried a wisdom that seemed beyond his 12 years, and Melissa realized that somewhere along the way, her son had grown into someone who could offer comfort and perspective when she needed it most. The role reversal was both touching and slightly startling. "Besides," Nathan added with a grin, "George was wearing regular jeans and a plain shirt in the store. I don't think he cares about fancy clothes." Melissa chose her simplest dress, a navy blue shirt dress that she had bought for job interviews, but rarely had occasion to wear. With Nathan's help, she styled her hair in a way that felt both neat and approachable. Looking in the mirror, she felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. When was the last time she had dressed up for something fun rather than necessary? As evening approached, they shared an early dinner of Nathan's favorite grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. The chocolate cake sat on the counter like a centerpiece, waiting for the actual birthday celebration the next day. The normalcy of their meal contrasted sharply with the extraordinary nature of their evening plans, creating a surreal atmosphere that had them both giggling with nervous energy. "Mom," Nathan said as they finished eating, "what do you think will happen at the concert?" "I don't know, mijo, but whatever happens, we'll experience it together." As they prepared to leave for the community center, Nathan tucked the note that had started everything into his pocket. The same piece of paper that Frank had crumpled and dismissed had ultimately led to the most amazing day of his life. It seemed important to keep it close, a tangible reminder that sometimes our greatest challenges can lead to our most unexpected blessings. The drive to the community center took only 10 minutes, but it felt like they were traveling to another world. Cars were already filling the parking lot, and people were walking toward the building with the excited energy that precedes any great performance. Nathan pressed his face to the window, taking in every detail of his first concert experience. "There's a line at the will call window," Melissa observed, suddenly worried about the logistics of their invitation. Do you think George really left tickets for us? Before Nathan could respond, a young woman in a George Strait tour t-shirt approached their car as they parked. "Are you the Rodriguez family?" she asked with a warm smile. When Melissa nodded, the woman's smile grew even brighter. "I'm Sarah, George's tour coordinator. He asked me to escort you inside personally. He's really looking forward to seeing you both again." As they followed Sarah through a side entrance, avoiding the crowds and lines, Nathan felt like he was living in a dream. The hallways backstage were buzzing with activity as crew members prepared for the show, and the sound of instruments being tuned created a musical backdrop that made Nathan's heart race with anticipation. "George is finishing his sound check," Sarah explained as they walked, "but he wanted me to show you to your seats first. He specifically requested that you have the best view in the house." When they emerged into the main auditorium, Nathan's jaw dropped. Their seats were in the front row, directly center stage, with a perfect view of the entire performance area. The community center had been transformed into an intimate concert venue, with professional lighting and sound equipment that made the space feel much larger and more impressive than Nathan had expected. "These can't be real," Nathan signed to, his mother still in disbelief. "They're real," Melissa confirmed, her own amazement evident in her expression. As they settled into their seats, Nathan noticed people throughout the auditorium pointing in their direction and whispering. Word of the afternoon's events at Murphy's Grocery had apparently spread throughout the small town, and their presence at the concert as George's personal guests had become part of the evening's story. But Nathan no longer felt self-conscious about being the center of attention. The boy who had entered the grocery store that afternoon, fearful and nervous, had been replaced by someone who understood his own worth and the power of standing up for what was right. The night was still young, but already Nathan knew that this day had changed him forever. As the lights dimmed and the crowd fell silent, Nathan felt a gentle vibration through the floor that told him the music was about to begin. He reached over and took his mother's hand, ready to experience magic together. Section 5. The stage erupted in brilliant white light as George Strait walked out to thunderous applause, his iconic presence commanding the attention of every person in the packed community center. He wore his signature black cowboy hat and a simple white button-down shirt, looking every bit the legend that had earned him the title King of Country Music. But as his eyes scanned the audience, they stopped when they found Nathan and Melissa in the front row, and his face broke into a warm, genuine smile. "Good evening, Cedar Creek," George called out, his voice carrying easily through the sound system. "What a beautiful night we have here in Texas. I want to start by telling you about something that happened to me today that reminded me why I love small towns and the good people who live in them." Nathan felt his heart racing as he realized George was about to share their story with the entire audience. He looked around nervously, but his mother squeezed his hand reassuringly, and he drew strength from her presence. "This afternoon, I witnessed something at the local grocery store that broke my heart and then filled it with hope," George continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I watched a young man face cruelty and misunderstanding, but I also watched him handle it with more grace and dignity than most adults could muster. Nathan Rodriguez, would you please stand up?" The spotlight found Nathan in the front row, and he slowly rose to his feet, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. The entire auditorium erupted in applause, with people throughout, the crowd standing to show their support and admiration. "Nathan is deaf," George explained as the applause died down. "And today he was trying to buy birthday gifts for his mother with money he had saved for 8 months. When he tried to communicate his needs, he was met with impatience and dismissal. But Nathan didn't give up, and he didn't let that treatment define him or diminish his kindness." George paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Nathan, I want you to know that your courage today inspired me, and I hope your story inspires everyone here tonight. Would you and your beautiful mother join me on stage?" Nathan looked at his mother in shock, his hands frozen mid-sign as he processed the invitation. Melissa's eyes were wide with surprise, but she nodded encouragingly, and together they made their way up the steps to the stage. The crowd's applause grew even louder as they appeared in the stage lights, and Nathan felt overwhelmed by the warmth and support radiating from hundreds of strangers. George greeted them both with warm hugs, then positioned them beside him at center stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, Nathan Rodriguez and his mother Melissa, two of the finest people I've had the pleasure to meet." Nathan found himself standing in front of more people than he had ever seen in one place, all of them looking at him with smiles and appreciation. The boy, who had felt invisible and dismissed just hours earlier, was now being celebrated by an entire community. "Nathan," George said, turning to face him directly, "I learned something about you today that I think this audience should know. Your mother told me backstage that despite all the challenges you face, you're a straight-A student. You help your elderly neighbors with their groceries every week, and you've never missed a day volunteering at the local animal shelter. You represent the very best of what young people can be." The crowd erupted again, and Nathan felt tears of joy and gratitude streaming down his face. He looked out at the sea of supportive faces and realized that his story had touched something in each of them, reminding them of the importance of kindness and understanding. George picked up his guitar and adjusted the microphone. "I want to dedicate this next song to Nathan and Melissa, and to everyone who has ever felt different or misunderstood. This is Carrying Your Love With Me. But tonight, it's about carrying kindness and compassion with us wherever we go." As George began to play, Nathan felt the vibrations of the music through the stage floor, and he watched in amazement as his mother began to cry tears of pure joy. The song took on new meaning as George sang about love being a constant companion, and Nathan realized that the love and support he felt from his mother, and now from this entire community, would always be with him no matter what challenges he faced. When the song ended, George set down his guitar and pulled out his phone. "I want to show you all something," he said, projecting his phone screen onto the large monitors flanking the stage. "While we've been here tonight, the video of what happened at Murphy's Grocery this afternoon has been shared over 50,000 times on social media. Nathan's story is spreading across the country, and people everywhere are talking about the importance of patience, kindness, and inclusion." Nathan stared at the screen in disbelief as comments poured in from viewers around the world, all sharing their own stories of overcoming adversity and praising his courage. The simple act of trying to buy birthday gifts had somehow become a symbol of perseverance and dignity that was resonating with people far beyond Cedar Creek. "But that's not all," George continued, his voice building with excitement. "The response to Nathan's story has been so overwhelming that I've decided to do something about it. Starting next month, I'm partnering with the Texas Education Agency to create a statewide program that will provide sign language instruction in elementary schools across Texas." The audience gasped collectively, and Nathan felt his knees go, weak with shock. His mother grabbed his arm for support, her own face showing complete amazement at this unexpected announcement. "Furthermore," George went on, "I'm establishing the Nathan Rodriguez Scholarship Fund to provide educational support for deaf and hard-of-hearing students throughout Texas. And Melissa, I understand you're fluent in sign language and have experience working with children. I'd like to offer you the position of program director for our new initiative, if you're interested." Melissa's hands flew to her mouth as she processed what George had just offered. A stable, well-paying job doing work. She was passionate about helping children like her son. It seemed too good to be true, but the sincerity in George's eyes told her it was absolutely real. Nathan looked out at the audience, then back at George, then at his mother, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. In the span of 12 hours, he had gone from being humiliated and dismissed to being celebrated and honored, and his simple desire to surprise his mother had somehow sparked a movement that would help countless other children. "Nathan," George said, kneeling down to the boy's eye level, "you taught me something important today about seeing people for who they really are, not just how they communicate. You have a gift for bringing out the best in people, and I hope you never lose that." George then surprised everyone by signing his response. "Thank you for reminding me that the most important conversations don't always require words." Nathan signed back, "Thank you for hearing me when no one else would listen." The entire auditorium fell silent as they watched this exchange, many people wiping away tears as they witnessed the profound connection between the country music legend and the brave young boy. George stood and addressed the crowd one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, Nathan Rodriguez has reminded us all that courage comes in many forms and that the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest changes. Let's all carry a little bit of Nathan's spirit with us as we leave here tonight." As the concert continued, with George performing his greatest hits, Nathan and Melissa remained on stage, sometimes sitting in chairs provided by the crew, sometimes standing and swaying to the music they could feel through the vibrations in the floor. Nathan watched in wonder as his mother smiled more freely than he had seen in years, finally able to relax and enjoy herself without worrying about bills or work schedules. When George performed Amarillo Morning, he invited Nathan to help him by holding up cue cards with the lyrics for the audience to sing along. Nathan had memorized every word years ago, and seeing an entire auditorium singing together, united in music and joy, filled him with a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. As the evening wound down and George prepared for his final song, he called Nathan and Melissa back to center stage. "Before we end tonight, I want to present Nathan with something special," he announced, producing a beautiful acoustic guitar signed by every member of his band. "This guitar has traveled with me for 15 years, George explained, "and now I want it to travel with you. Music has the power to heal, to unite, and to inspire. I have a feeling you're going to do amazing things, Nathan." Nathan accepted the guitar with reverence, knowing that this instrument represented not just a gift, but a symbol of all the doors that had opened for him because he had refused to give up when faced with adversity. As the crowd gave them a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever, Nathan looked out at the hundreds of faces beaming back at him and realized that his story was no longer just about buying birthday gifts or even about overcoming prejudice. It had become a story about the power of human connection, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the incredible things that can happen when people choose kindness over indifference. The boy who had walked into Murphy's grocery that afternoon feeling nervous and small, now stood on stage, feeling confident and empowered, surrounded by love and support he could never have imagined. His mother's birthday surprise had turned into something much bigger, a reminder to an entire community that every person has value, every story matters, and every act of courage, no matter how small, has the power to change the world. As George Strait launched into his final song of the evening, "The Chair," Nathan and Melissa swayed together in the stage lights, their hearts full of gratitude for a day that had started with simple dreams and ended with extraordinary possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, and new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged, together, celebrated, and loved.